January 21st, 2025. A newly inaugurated president sits behind the resolute desk. Among the stack of executive actions waiting for his signature is a name that, on paper, should not be there. Ross Ulbricht, a federal prisoner, a man serving 2 life sentences, plus 40 years, no parole, no realistic chance of ever leaving prison alive. Yet within moments, the president signs the document. And just like that, Ross Ulbricht is free, not through a sentence reduction, not through early release, a full and unconditional presidential pardon. For many Americans, the reaction was immediate. How? How does someone sentenced to die in prison end up receiving one of the most powerful acts of mercy available in the United States? Because presidential pardons don't happen by accident. Someone has to make it onto the president's desk. And that's where this story becomes strange. He wasn't even a household name. He was one of the most infamous criminals on the internet. And here's the part that made the case so controversial. Ross had never been convicted of physically harming anyone, yet his punishment was harsher than many violent offenders receive. Why? And why would thousands of people spend more than a decade trying to free him? The answer involves a darknet empire, a controversial sentencing battle, murder-for-hire allegations, corrupt federal agents, and a presidential campaign promise that may have changed everything. Before we talk about Silk Road, we need to talk about the sentence. Because the sentence is what turned Ross Ulbricht into a national debate. People receive life sentences. That's not unusual. Ross received 2 plus 40 years. Think about that. A single life sentence already means you'll likely die in prison. So why add another? And 40 extra years? The message was clear. You are never leaving, ever. Supporters were stunned. Critics of Ross were stunned. Even many people who believed he deserved punishment questioned how the sentence became so severe. Ross Ulbricht was either a dangerous criminal mastermind or the victim of one of the most excessive sentences in modern American history. In 2011, Ross Ulbricht launched a website called Silk Road. To many users, it looked familiar. Buyers, sellers, ratings, reviews, the same basic ingredients used by countless online marketplaces. But authorities believed Silk Road represented something fundamentally different. Many of the products being sold were illegal, most famously drugs. And unlike traditional criminal networks, users could interact through the internet while concealing their identities. This wasn't simply a website breaking the law. According to prosecutors, it was a system designed to make illegal commerce easier, larger, and harder to stop. And that's what alarmed authorities. To investigators, Silk Road wasn't just another criminal operation. It was proof that an entirely new type of criminal marketplace could exist, one that wasn't limited by geography, one that could connect buyers and sellers across the world, and one that appeared to be growing. Every successful transaction suggested the same thing. If Silk Road worked, others could copy it, and that made shutting it down far more urgent. And at the center of that system was a mysterious figure known only as Dread Pirate Roberts. Nobody knew who he was. Nobody knew where he lived. Nobody knew whether he was one person or many. But one thing became increasingly obvious. Whoever operated Silk Road had just become one of the FBI's highest profile targets. The FBI wasn't chasing a person. They were chasing an identity, a username, a ghost. For years, investigators followed digital breadcrumbs scattered across the internet. Old forum posts, email addresses, technical traces, online conversations. Each clue seemed insignificant by itself. But investigators weren't looking at individual clues. They were assembling a puzzle, and eventually they believed they had found their answer. Ross Ulbricht. But identifying a suspect wasn't enough. They needed proof. And that proof was allegedly sitting inside an encrypted laptop, a laptop that could become inaccessible if it was closed. So investigators waited. October 1st, 2013, San Francisco Public Library. Ross sat at a table working on his computer. Agents watched from nearby, waiting. Then they moved. A distraction, a split second, one brief glance away, and agents seized the laptop before Ross could shut it. Still unlocked, still active. For investigators, it was a breakthrough. For Ross Ulbricht, it was the moment everything changed. But strangely enough, the story was about to get even stranger. As if the Silk Road case wasn't bizarre enough, 2 federal agents involved in the investigation would later be convicted of crimes themselves. Both men participated in aspects of the Silk Road investigation, and both would later face criminal convictions connected to misconduct. The details were different, but the result was the same. The investigators hunting criminals had committed crimes of their own. The evidence against Ross remained intact, but the revelations gave supporters something powerful, another reason to question the broader fairness of the case. And as public skepticism grew, so did interest in another controversy, the one involving murder-for-hire allegations. For years, many people believed Ross Ulbricht had been convicted of trying to have people killed. But that isn't what happened. Here's what we know. Federal prosecutors alleged that Ross attempted to hire killings. Those allegations became public, and they spread rapidly through media coverage and public discussion. But Ross was never convicted of murder for hire. Those allegations were not decided by the jury that convicted him in the Silk Road trial. No murders were proven to have occurred, yet the allegations remained attached to Ross's public image, which created a contradiction. The fact that the 2 officers were corrupt gave them a reason to believe. Supporters pointed out that Ross had never been convicted of violence. Critics pointed out that prosecutors believed he had attempted to arrange violence. Both sides believed they had the stronger argument, and that disagreement became one of the driving forces behind a movement that refused to disappear. Most criminal cases disappear from public attention. This one didn't. Months passed, then years, yet people kept talking about Ross Ulbricht. Online, at conferences, in interviews, at political events. The message was simple: free Ross. What's interesting is that most supporters weren't arguing Ross was innocent. They were arguing something else, that the punishment didn't fit the crime, and that raises an uncomfortable question. How much punishment is enough? Because even people who believed Ross was guilty couldn't agree on the answer. Imagine 2 people looking at the exact same case. The first sees Ross as the architect of a massive criminal marketplace, a platform that enabled illegal drug sales on an unprecedented scale. From that perspective, a harsh sentence makes sense. But the second person sees something different. They see a first-time offender, someone who wasn't convicted of violence, someone who received 2 life sentences plus 40 years. And they ask, was that really necessary? This disagreement became the heart of the entire Free Ross movement. Not whether Ross committed crimes, but whether the punishment was fair. And as the debate grew louder, one person refused to let the story disappear. While much of the public moved on, Lynn Ulbricht didn't. Ross's mother spent years campaigning for her son's release. She gave interviews, attended events, spoke to politicians, signed petitions, and kept the case alive. Year after year, most advocacy campaigns fade. This one survived for more than a decade. Because over time, Ross stopped being viewed as just a prisoner. Different groups began seeing him as a symbol. Libertarians saw government overreach. Criminal justice reform advocates saw excessive sentencing. Parts of the cryptocurrency community saw one of the most famous figures connected to Bitcoin's early history. Whether those interpretations were correct is a matter of opinion, but the fact that they existed is not. And eventually, those ideas reached national politics. For more than 10 years, Ross remained in prison. Nothing suggested that would change. Then something happened that almost nobody could have predicted. A federal prisoner serving 2 life sentences became relevant to a presidential campaign. In 2024, Donald Trump appeared at the Libertarian National Convention, and one issue kept appearing. Ross Ulbricht. Free Ross signs were visible throughout the crowd. Supporters had spent years keeping the issue alive. Now they were standing directly in front of a presidential candidate. Then Trump made a promise. If elected, he would free Ross Ulbricht. The crowd erupted, one of the loudest reactions of the night. And in that moment, Ross's case became something it had never been before. A campaign issue. And campaign issues have a way of reaching places ordinary prisoners never can, including the Oval Office. January 2025. Trump returned to office and almost immediately followed through. Ross Ulbricht received a full and unconditional pardon. Not a commutation, not a reduced sentence, a pardon. After more than a decade in federal prison, Ross walked free. Supporters celebrated. The debate reignited overnight. But underneath all the arguments remained the same question: why did this happen? The real mystery was never why Donald Trump signed the pardon. Presidents sign pardons all the time. The real mystery is how Ross Ulbricht's name ended up on the president's desk in the first place. The strongest evidence points toward a simple answer. Ross Ulbricht became more than a prisoner. He became a symbol. For more than a decade, supporters worked to transform the conversation around his case. The conviction didn't disappear. The evidence didn't change. The facts remained largely the same. What changed was what Ross represented. And once enough people attached larger ideas to Ross Ulbricht, his case became politically valuable. Without the Free Ross movement, there is little evidence a pardon would have happened. And without the promise made in 2024, there is little evidence Ross's case would have reached the president's desk. And that transformation may have been powerful enough to accomplish something that once seemed impossible. It got a man serving 2 life sentences plus 40 years all the way to the Oval Office. And from there, all it took was a signature.